Welcome to Romance Haven. Before today's story begins, take a moment to settle in, because once you hear the first page, you may not want to stop until the very end. Tonight's tale is filled with scandal, dangerous secrets, impossible choices, and a love that begins with betrayal. If you enjoy captivating Regency romance audiobooks, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing so you never miss a new story. Your escape into romance awaits. Now, happy listening. The Wager Book, Chapter 1. The page arrived folded inside a letter with no signature, and Honora Quill read it 3 times before her hands went cold. It was torn from a betting book. She knew that much from the ruled columns and the careless, expensive handwriting. The kind of hand produced by men who had never once worried whether ink cost money. The entry was numbered 214, dated the 4th of October, and it read, "Mr. T. Renshaw wagers 50 guineas that no gentleman of the county can bring Miss H. Quill of Netherwallop Parsonage to accept a courtship before 12th night, taken by Sir John Pettibone. 50 guineas. Her father's living paid 90 a year." Below the entry, in a different hand, someone had scrawled, "The vicar's daughter, gentleman," colder than the font she was christened in. Nora set the page down on the kitchen table, next to the bowl of apples she had been peeling, and sat very still. Outside, the pig was complaining about something. The kettle ticked on the hob. Ordinary sounds, in an ordinary kitchen, on the morning she learned that the men of the county had priced her pride at 50 guineas and found the odds amusing. Her younger sister Patience leaned over her shoulder, read the entry, and gasped with what was frankly an indecent amount of delight. "Renshaw? Theodore Renshaw? Of Amberhurst?" "Apparently. But you've never even spoken to him. Have you spoken to him?" "Once." Nora picked up her paring knife and resumed peeling, because her hands wanted occupation. "At the harvest supper. He asked me to pass the salt cellar. I passed it. It was a very moving exchange." "Then why would he—" "Because I refused Sir John Pettibone in June, and Mr. Crake in August. And because men who are refused do not say, 'How reasonable, she did not care for me.' They gather at their club and decide the fault is in the woman." The apple skin came away in one long, unbroken ribbon. "Colder than the font. That is rather good, actually. I may embroider it on a cushion." "Nora! 50 guineas, Patience." Her voice stayed level. It cost her something, but it stayed level. "Papa preached in a mended cassock all last winter so that we could keep the school subscription going, and Theodore Renshaw wagered 50 guineas on whether I can be brought to heel." Patience was quiet for a moment, then carefully, "What are you going to do?" Nora looked at the page again, at the confident sprawl of T. Renshaw, a man so rich in unearned assurance that he signed his contempt. "I am going to the Michaelmas Assembly on Thursday," she said, "and I am going to make Mr. Renshaw lose." The assembly rooms at Marlow Green smelled of beeswax, crushed lavender, and 40 people determined to enjoy themselves in a space built for 25. Nora arrived in her grey silk, turned twice, but well turned, with her mother's garnet cross at her throat, and a plan of campaign worked out to the last syllable. It took her a quarter of an hour to find him, because Theodore Renshaw was not, as she had expected, holding court at the centre of the room. He was standing near the card-room door, with his back half to the company, watching the entrance the way a man watches a road he expects bad news to travel down. He was taller than she remembered from the salt cellar incident. Dark-haired, tired around the eyes, dressed with the sort of correctness that suggested a valet who cared more than his master did. When the fiddles struck up the first country dance, he did not move toward the floor. Nora walked directly up to him, Several heads turned. The vicar's daughter, approaching a gentleman, unintroduced and unaccompanied. Good. She wanted witnesses. Mr. Renshaw? He turned. Up close, she revised her estimate, not tired around the eyes, exhausted. Miss Quill? A pause. I don't believe we've been. We have. You required salt. I provided it. She kept her voice pleasant, pitched for the half-dozen matrons within earshot. I've come to thank you. Wariness moved across his face like weather. For the salt? For the compliment. It isn't every woman who's worth 50 guineas of a gentleman's doubt. She watched the words land, watched him go very still. Entry 214, Mr. Renshaw. Someone was kind enough to send me the page. Your hand is quite distinctive. All those confident loops. My father would say a man's tea reveals his character. Yours is enormous. Around them, conversation had begun to falter, the way it does when a room scents blood. Miss Quill. His voice dropped. There is a private matter. Oh, I think we're past privacy. You made me a public entertainment, entry number 214, right below a wager about a curricle race. I merely thought you should know the terms have changed. She smiled, and let the smile show teeth. You bet 50 guineas that I could be brought to accept a courtship by 12th night. I have come to promise you, in front of the entire assembly if necessary, that I will see you lose. I will refuse every man in this county so thoroughly, so cheerfully, and so publicly, that by Christmas you will be a byword from here to Winchester. They will put it in the book. Entry 215, Mr. Renshaw, ruined by the font water. And there, for half a second, something happened in his face that she had not planned for. He looked relieved. It was gone almost before she could name it, shuttered behind a formal blankness, but she had seen it, and it stopped her prepared speech dead in her mouth. Men caught in humiliation flushed, or blustered, or sneered. They did not look like a debtor hearing that the bailiff had gone to the wrong house. You are entirely within your rights, he said quietly. The wager is contemptible. I'd advise you to refuse Pettibone with particular relish. He's had it coming since June, I understand. He inclined his head. Enjoy your victory, Miss Quill. I'll bear the loss. He moved to go. Actually moved to leave, as though 50 guineas and public disgrace were a bill he'd simply decided to pay. Nora stepped into his path. It was not in the plan. The plan had involved him protesting, and her demolishing his protests, and possibly some applause. That's all? She said. No defence? No explanation of how it was a joke? How I'm making too much of it? How ladies don't understand club humour? Would any of that improve your evening? It might improve my understanding. You've just surrendered a battle you paid 50 guineas to start. Either you're the most incompetent gambler in Hampshire, Mr. Renshaw, or... She stopped. The loops. The enormous, confident tea. She had spent 2 days staring at that torn page. She had also spent 2 days sorting the parish charity subscriptions, which included a pledge from Amberhurst. £5 annually for the school, signed each Lady Day. She'd handled that pledge card 12 times, and the T on it was cramped. Careful. Nothing like the sprawl on entry 214. Or you didn't write it, she finished slowly. The blankness on his face didn't crack. That was the trouble. It didn't crack in the particular, effortful way of a man holding a door closed with his shoulder. I signed it, he said. That is not what I said. I said you didn't write it. She lowered her voice at last, because this part, whatever it was, did not want witnesses after all. Someone wrote your name into that book, and instead of calling him out, which is what every other man in that club would do over a forged 50 guineas. You're standing in an assembly room letting a vicar's daughter flay you in public and thanking her for the privilege. Who are you protecting, Mr. Renshaw? For a long moment he looked at her, and she had the strangest sense of being recalculated, as though she'd walked into the room as one kind of problem and was rapidly becoming another. You count the charity subscriptions, he said. Someone must. My father trusts everyone. It's his profession. Answer the question. Miss Quill? The card-room door banged open behind them. A young man came through it laughing, golden-haired, beautifully dressed, and drunk in the loose, glittering way that precedes disaster. He caught sight of them, and his face lit up with ruinous delight. Theo, there you are. And this must be the famous Miss Quill. He swept a bow that nearly capsized him. Freddie Renshaw, madam, entirely at your service. I say, has my brother told you about the wager? Because I have such a confession. Theodore Renshaw's hand closed on his brother's arm, hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Frederick, he said, in a voice Nora had not heard from him yet, low and pleasant and absolutely terrifying. You will apologize to Miss Quill for the interruption, and then you and I are going home. Freddie blinked, swayed, looked between his brother's face and Nora's with dawning, drunken comprehension, and then, God help them all, he grinned. You haven't told her, he said. Oh, Theo, you beautiful martyr. You haven't told her anything. Chapter 2. Theodore Renshaw got his brother out of the assembly rooms with a speed that would have impressed a press gang. Nora watched them go. Freddie still talking. Theo steering him by the arm through the crowd with a fixed social smile that fooled precisely no one, and stood for a moment in the wake of it, aware that half the room was now watching her. Mrs. Pettibone's sister was already leaning toward Mrs. Craik. By morning, the county would know that the vicar's daughter had accosted Mr. Renshaw of Amberhurst at the Michaelmas Assembly and driven him from the building. The story would grow a slapped face by Sunday. Let it. Nora had a more pressing problem. She had come here to demolish a villain, and the villain had thanked her, surrendered, and been dragged off stage by a drunk brother shouting about confessions. You beautiful martyr. You haven't told her anything. She retrieved her cloak from the anteroom, told Patience she needed air, and did the thing no sensible woman would do. She went out after them. The inn-yard behind the assembly rooms was all frost and lamplight, the cobbles slick and glittering, the air sharp with horse and coal smoke and coming winter. Somewhere in the dark, a stable boy was whistling through his teeth. The Renshaw carriage stood at the far end, its lamps lit, and beside it 2 figures, one propped against the wheel, one standing over him. Nora stopped in the shadow of the archway. She was not proud of it. She listened anyway. Had no choice, Theo. You don't understand what he's like. Lower your voice. He said either the money or the entry. Those were the terms. And I didn't have the money. I haven't had the money since Newmarket, so I... Freddie's voice buckled. He sounded younger suddenly, and much less drunk. I only had to write the name. That's all. One name in a book. And it couldn't be mine, could it? Because if it's mine, he calls it in, all of it. And Mother... Stop! The word cracked across the yard, like ice breaking. Even the stable boy's whistling stopped. When Theo spoke again, it was quieter, and somehow worse. You forged my hand in a club betting book to settle your debt to Pettibone. Do you understand what that is called, Frederick? Not among friends, not at cards, in law? Silence. A horse shifted its weight, harness ringing. He said no one would ever question it. Freddie whispered. No one did. That's rather the point of my signing it. A long breath, visible as fog in the lamplight. 50 guineas to Pettibone when the wager falls due, your vowels cancelled, and no one looks too closely at the hand. You get to stay golden. Mother gets to die believing she raised at least one son who... He stopped himself. The unfinished sentence hung in the cold. Nora's own breath had gone shallow. She had come out here expecting some ordinary sordidness. A debt, a dare, brothers quarrelling. Not this. Not a dying mother 2 miles away at Amberhurst, and a forgery bought back with a man's public name. Paid out in instalments of humiliation at 50 guineas and one assembly room flaying at a time. She must have moved. Gravel shifted under her boot, no louder than a coin dropped on a carpet. Theo turned. His eyes found her in the archway shadow at once, as though he'd known the whole time exactly where bad news would be standing. Miss Quill. Flat. Of course. I didn't... She stepped into the lamplight, because skulking was worse. I came for air. You came for the rest of the sentence my brother started indoors. He said something low to Freddie, who folded himself into the carriage with the exaggerated care of the very drunk, and then Theo crossed the yard to her. Frost crunched under each step. He stopped at a proper distance. Even now, even here, correct, and the lamplight carved his face into planes of tired gold. How much did you hear? Enough to owe you an apology. It cost her, and she paid it in full, chin up. I flayed the wrong man in front of 40 witnesses. I'm told I was very entertaining. You were magnificent, he said, without any inflection at all, which somehow made it worse than flattery. Every word of it deserved, just not by me. Then let me undeserve it, publicly. I'll write to the club, I'll tell my father, I'll stand up at the next assembly and... You will do none of those things, Mr. Renshaw. Think it through. You're the cleverest person in that room by a margin. Do me the courtesy. He nodded back toward the assembly, the muffled fiddles, the golden windows. You announce the entry is forged. The club examines the book. The hand is identified inside a week. There are men in that club who've seen Freddie's writing on vowels since he was 19. Forgery of a wager to discharge a debt. He's finished. Not embarrassed, Miss Quill. Finished. And my mother, who has perhaps till Lady Day, spends what's left of her time watching it happen. The cold was getting into Nora's cloak now, up through the soles of her boots. She barely noticed. So, instead, you'll pay Pettibone his 50 guineas at Twelfth Night, she said slowly, and let the county laugh at you for losing, and let me spend the next 3 months publicly grinding your name into the frost, because every refusal I hand out makes the wager look more real. You have a gift for summary. It's monstrous. It's arithmetic. 1 reputation spends better than 2. He glanced at the carriage, where his brother's head had tipped against the window glass, angelic and insensible. Mine was never being used for anything in particular. And there it was again. That thing she'd seen in the assembly room. Not self-pity. Nothing so warm. Just a man stating the balance of an account he'd long ago stopped expecting to see corrected. Nora discovered, to her considerable irritation, that she wanted to correct it. No, she said. I beg your pardon? No, I won't spend 3 months as Pettibone's instrument. Because that's what I'd be. Do you think it through, Mr. Renshaw? Sir John proposed to me in June. I refused him. In October, a wager materializes with my name in it, on terms he dictated, designed so that a woman he resents is publicly hunted for a season, while a man he happens to hold in debt pays for the privilege. He aimed that book at both of us. I declined to be his ammunition. For the first time since she'd met him, Theodore Renshaw looked genuinely off balance. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I don't know yet. Something better than martyrdom, which appears to be the only plan currently in—" "Well," said a new voice from the archway, warm and carrying and pleased with itself. "This is cosy." Sir John Pettibone stood in the mouth of the yard, hat tilted, gloves in one hand, backlit by the assembly's glow. Behind him, Nora could hear the fiddles winding into the supper dance. The vicar's daughter and the losing party, alone in an inn yard at 10 o'clock. He strolled forward, unhurried, his smile the exact temperature of the frost. "You know, Renshaw, if she accepts a courtship from anyone before 12th night, anyone at all, you lose the wager just the same. The book doesn't specify whose." He drew on one glove, taking his time over each finger, and looked at Nora the way a man looks at an entry in a ledger. "So, do be careful out here in the dark, Miss Quill. You wouldn't want to make this too easy for me." Chapter 3. Mr. Renshaw of Amberhurst called at Nether Wallop Parsonage at 11 o'clock the next morning, and the Reverend Josiah Quill received him with the unguarded delight of a man to whom the entire world was a promising acquaintance. "The school pledge, in person. My dear sir, the post would have done—" "Sit, sit. Patience. The good chairs. You'll take coffee, of course you will. £5 annually, and here you've brought it early. You see, Nora? And people say the age of charity is dead." "People say a great many things, Papa," said Nora from the doorway. She had heard the horse from the kitchen and known, simply known, with an accuracy that annoyed her, whose it would be. She had also spent a sleepless night arranging her thoughts into columns, the way she arranged the subscription accounts, and the columns all summed to the same total. Sir John Pettibone had aimed a loaded book at 2 families, and only one person in the county was positioned to see both barrels. Theo rose when she entered. In daylight, in her father's shabby parlour with its water-stained ceiling and its wall of sermons, he looked larger and more expensive and visibly uncertain of his welcome. A man who had rehearsed a pretext and was now performing it before an audience of one vicar, one delighted younger sister, and one young woman who knew precisely what the pretext was. "Miss Quill." "Mr. Renshaw. How is your mother this morning?" Something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, she thought, that anyone had asked plainly instead of around. "She had a good night. Thank you." "Renshaw's mother," said the vicar, softening at once. Of course. I remember her at the church door 30 years ago, handing out apples to the school children out of the carriage window. Tell her she is prayed for, sir. Daily." "I will." A pause. She'd like that. Coffee arrived. Small talk was performed. Patience stared at Theo over the rim of her cup with the round-eyed attention of a girl assembling material for a decade of teasing. And when the vicar began, inevitably, to describe his plans for the school's winter fuel, Nora set down her cup and said, "Papa, Mr. Renshaw ought to see where his £5 goes. I'll show him the schoolroom garden before the rain comes in." Her father beamed at this evidence of civic feeling. Patience made a sound into her coffee that would need addressing later. The garden was October at its most honest. Seed heads and bare canes, late apples nobody had picked, a bonfire of leaves smoking damply by the wall so that the whole morning smelled of endings. A single stubborn wasp patrolled the windfalls. Nora led him down the path until the parlour windows lost their line of sight, then stopped and turned. "Well, you came. I half thought last night's arithmetic would reassert itself by morning." "It did," Theo said. I sat down twice to write you a letter explaining, very reasonably, why you should stay out of this entirely. What happened to the letters? They were extremely reasonable. I burned them. He looked at the smoking leaves, mouth tugging sideways for the first time since she'd met him. Not a smile, exactly, but a place where a smile had once stood. Pettibone followed me into the yard last night to make a threat in front of you. That was a mistake, and he's not a man who makes many. It means you worried him. I want to know why. I can tell you exactly why. Nora clasped her hands behind her back, schoolroom fashion, because otherwise they would gesture, and she needed him to hear this as ledger fact, not feeling. I keep the parish accounts, all of them, subscriptions, tithes in kind, the poor rate, the school fund. Sir John Pettibone has been a subscriber for 6 years and churchwarden for 2. And his money, Mr. Renshaw, does not behave like other people's money. Meaning? Meaning it arrives late and leaves early. Meaning the poor fund loans he guarantees to labourers get repaid to him in labour on his enclosures at rates I cannot make honest on paper. Meaning that in March, £4 of school money passed through his hands and arrived as £3.12, with an explanation about carriage costs that does not survive the observation that the money travelled 2 miles. She recited it flatly. One instance is error. I have found 11. I found the 12th at 2 o'clock this morning because I could not sleep, and anger wants employment. Theo had gone very still, the same stillness as the assembly room, but pointed the other way now, like a glass turned to the light. You're telling me the man holding my brother's vowels has been skimming a parish poor fund? I'm telling you he lends the way he wagers. Small amounts, plausible terms, and always structured, so the paper protects him and ruins the other party. Your brother isn't his first, Mr. Renshaw. He's just the best born. There's a tenant farmer at Broadmead who signed something in drink 2 years ago and has been paying for it in his daughter's service ever since. There was a curate before my father's time. There is a pattern, and patterns are only invisible to people who don't keep books. The wasp droned past between them. Somewhere beyond the wall, the school children were chanting their tables 8 times through the smoke. Why haven't you exposed him? Theo asked quietly. With what? A vicar's daughter's suspicions against a baronet's word? Every entry I could point to has an explanation attached. That's the craft of it. I'd need his own papers, his counterfoils, his private ledger, the vowels he holds. She lifted her chin. Which is where you come in. You dine where he dines. You belong to his club. Men talk to you. And more importantly, men owe him all over this county and are ashamed of it. And shame talks to a man who's known to be carrying the same wound. Last night made you the most publicly humiliated gentleman in Hampshire. Congratulations. It's the best disguise either of us could ask for. Theo looked at her for a long moment. The tired lines were still there around his eyes, but something behind them had woken up and was, she suspected, recalculating her again. So, your proposal, he said slowly, is that we let the wager stand. You refuse your way across the county as loudly as possible, which keeps Pettibone smug and watching the wrong hand, while the 2 of us quietly assemble evidence that the churchwarden of Netherwallop is a usurer and a thief. And when we have it, we don't take it to the club. We take it to the archdeacon and the quarter sessions, where the book he's forged his safety into is bigger than his. She held out her hand, plain as a farmer at market. Partners, Mr. Renshaw. Nobody's martyr and nobody's ammunition. He looked at her hand, ungloved, ink-stained at the middle finger, steady. My brother forged 1 signature, and I've been bleeding for a month, he said. You're proposing we defraud a fraud, in secret, meeting how, behind bonfires? You understand that if we are seen together even twice, this county will decide the wager is won, and you'll be the story at every dinner table from here to— I've been the story since last night. I find it wonderfully clarifying. She kept the hand where it was. Well? His hand closed around hers, warm, careful, and a half-second longer than any bargain required. Partners, he said. God help us both. From the house came the bang of the parlour door, and her father's voice, carrying down the garden with the special joy he reserved for good news. Nora! Nora! Where? Ah, there you are. And Mr. Renshaw too, splendid. You'll both want to hear this. The Reverend Quill came beaming through the smoke, waving a letter like a flag. The most extraordinary providence. You know the living here has been in the gift of old Lord Carew's estate, all tangled up in chancery since he died. Well, it's settled at last. The advowson's been sold, and the new patron writes the kindest letter, promises to take the warmest interest in the parish and its family. The ground did not actually move under the garden. It only felt as though it had. Papa, Nora said. Who bought it? Her father consulted the letter happily. Why, our own churchwarden, Sir John Pettibone. Chapter 4. They had 2 minutes among the bonfire smoke before her father reached them, and they spent them like misers. He can't touch the living itself, Theo said, low and fast. Your father holds it for life. A patron presents the next incumbent, nothing more. You're thinking of what the law allows. Think of what a patron does. Nora watched her father come down the path, still waving his letter, still delighted, dear, trusting man. He approves repairs to the chancel roof, which leaks. He hears tithe disputes. He writes the letters that place curates and recommends daughters as governesses. He becomes, overnight, the weather this family lives under. And Mr. Renshaw. The living falls vacant to him eventually. My father is 61. Pettibone is buying the afterwards. Why? I refused him in June. She said it without ornament. Some men hear no and go away. Some men hear no and go shopping. Then her father was upon them, and there was nothing to do but admire the patron's kind letter, and agree it was a great providence, and watch Theo shake the vicar's hand in farewell with the expression of a man leaving a house he now knew to be on fire. 2 days later, by an accident so carefully arranged it had required 3 notes, and the corruption of her sister, Miss Quill and Miss Patience Quill, were overtaken on the Broadmead Lane by Mr. Renshaw's gig. It was raining the kind of fine, committed October rain that means to go on all day. Theo pulled up, performed astonishment at finding them abroad in it, and handed them up with the parish basket, beef tea, flannel, a paper of sugar for the Tarrant children, wedged at their feet. Patience arranged herself on the outside of the seat with the smugness of a girl who now possessed leverage over 2 adults, and the wet hedges slid by, and the whole gig smelled of rain on wool and the warm horse and, faintly, of him, cedar and clean leather. You realize, Patience observed to the sky, that being seen sharing a gig counts as being seen? Which is why we shan't be seen. Tarrant's Lane goes nowhere, but Tarrant's. Nora balanced the basket, hip to hip with Theo on the narrow seat, deeply conscious of the line of warmth where her arm could not avoid his. She fixed her attention on the horse's ears. Tell me about your brother before we arrive. If I'm to defend the second Renshaw account, I need the first explained. Why does Freddie owe a man like Pettibone and not you? He was quiet for a moment. Rain ticked on the gig's hood. Freddie is what my mother calls sunny, he said at last. He came late. I was 9. My father was dying. The house had been dark for 2 years. And then suddenly there was this laughing, golden creature in it, and everyone fed him laughter to keep it going, including me. You learn a household's economy young, Miss Quill. Ours ran on Freddie being happy, and it was my job to pay the costs quietly so nothing disturbed the sunshine. A muscle moved in his jaw. He's not wicked. That's the miserable part. He's 23, and no one has ever once let him find out what things cost. Pettibone found him at Newmarket like a fox finds an unlatched henhouse. And your mother doesn't know. My mother is dying pleased with the world. It is the last thing I can afford to buy her, and I intend to pay whatever it comes to. He said it evenly, and then, as if the evenness embarrassed him, "You'll say I've made the same mistake with him the whole house made." "No," said Nora. "I'd say I kept my family's books from 14, when my mother died, because Papa gives the coal money to anyone with a sad story, and Patience is sunny," Patience supplied comfortably. "It's true. I am. And I'd say I know exactly what it is to be the one who pays quietly, so nothing disturbs anyone." She looked at him then, and found him already looking at her, and for a moment the rain and the hedges went very far away. "It's lonely bookkeeping, Mr. Renshaw. That's all I'd say." His hand shifted slightly on the reins, toward her, an inch, no more. And then the gate of Broadmead was rattling under the horse's nose, and the moment folded itself away like a note passed in church. Amos Tarrant was a big man made smaller. That was the first thing you saw. A frame built for the plough with the confidence gone out of it. He stood in his own doorway turning his hat, as though they were the gentry come to collect. It took the basket, and Patience playing spillikins with the children, and 20 patient minutes before he would talk, and when he did, it came out of him like water from a cracked jug, in spurts, and then all at once. Michaelmas Fair, 2 years back. A run of bad luck, a friendly baronet, a paper signed by lantern light with brandy in him. £7 borrowed. He'd paid back 11 since, by his own count, and the debt now stood. Sir John's attorney, Mr. Larch of Andover, had shown him the figures, all correct, all legal, all wrong, at £9.4. "It's the paper does it," Tarrant said. "I can't read what I signed, miss, and that's my shame. But my Susan can. She's in service up at Stourfield, and she says even reading it, you can't find the trick. It's built like a snare's built. Nothing to see till it's shut." "Susan is in service at Stourfield Hall?" Theo asked. "In Sir John's own house?" "Second housemaid these 18 months. Part of the arrangement." The word came out of Tarrant like a tooth. "Her wages go against the debt. I've a daughter I never see, working off brandy I drank." Nora set down her cup, carefully, because her hands wanted very much to break something. "Mr. Tarrant, would Susan talk to us?" "She'd talk. She's her mother's temper, God rest her. But she'll tell you what she told me at Whitsun, which is that there's naught to find at the hall. She's cleaned every room in it. She makes a point of it now, you understand. And Sir John keeps no papers there worth the name. No strongbox, no private ledger, nothing but estate books any lawyer could kiss." He turned the hat again. "Whatever he keeps it somewhere else. All she knows is there's a little key he never takes off his watch chain, and one thing more, that she thought was nothing." "Nothing is my favourite kind of thing," said Nora. "Quarter days." Tarrant looked between them, uncertain of the worth of it. "Lady Day, Midsummer, Michaelmas, Christmas. Every quarter day regular as rent. Sir John has himself driven to Netherwallop Church of an evening. Churchwarden's business, he calls it." Goes in alone. Half an hour, maybe. Comes out with his coat buttoned. He shrugged his big, diminished shoulders. Susan only marked it because he goes alone. A man like that doesn't carry his own lantern for nothing, she says. The rain had eased when they came out. The whole farmyard shone. Theo handed the sisters up into the gig and stood a moment with his hand on the rail, looking at nothing, doing sums. She could see him doing them, and loved the look of it with a suddenness that she filed away, alarmed, for later audit. "The parish chest," he said. "In my church. He's keeping his snares in my family's pew rent, 50 feet from your father's pulpit." "It's better than that," Nora said. Her voice had gone strange and bright. Patience looked at her sharply. "The vestry chest has 3 locks, Mr. Renshaw. Ancient custom. 1 key to each churchwarden, and 1 to the incumbent. Pettibone's papers are sitting in a box that my father has had a key to all along. They made good time back along the wet lanes, the plan assembling itself between them in half sentences. And it was not until the gig rounded the churchyard wall that the talking stopped. A carriage stood at the parsonage gate, glossy, crested, blue and silver livery on the man holding the horses. Patience said, "Isn't that—" The parsonage door opened, and the Reverend Josiah Quill came out onto the step, hatless in the wet, looking up the lane as though he'd been watching for them for an hour. Nora had seen her father alarmed perhaps 4 times in her life. She was looking at the 5th. "Nora, my dear," he said. "Sir John is within. He has been so good as to sit with me this half hour, and we—" He pressed his hands together, a man praying and apologizing at once. "He has renewed his offer for you. And, my dear, he has asked me, as his incumbent, to give him my answer on the family's behalf by Sunday." Chapter 5. Sir John Pettibone rose when she entered the parlour, and the room seemed to rearrange itself around him, the way rooms did, her mother's chairs, her father's books, all of it suddenly looking shabby and borrowed in his presence, which was of course the intended effect. He had the trick of making other people's houses feel mortgaged. "Miss Quill, wet weather for walking?" "Charitable weather, Sir John. The poor are inconsiderate about sunshine." She sat, uninvited, in her father's chair, a small annexation of territory, and folded her hands. "I understand you've made Papa an offer that belongs to me. I've made your father aware of my constancy." He settled back, gloves across his knee, entirely comfortable. June was a refusal made by a young woman with, forgive me, an incomplete understanding of her situation. The situation has since completed itself. I thought it only fair the offer be renewed under the new terms. The new terms being that you own the roof over the pulpit. The new terms being that I am now in a position to be useful, Miss Quill, to a family I hold in the warmest regard. His voice never varied. That was the horror of the man. It was all delivered like a subscription list. The chancel roof. £40, I'm told, before the frost splits it further. Your sister. 16 next spring. Presentable. Portionless. A patron's wife could do a great deal for a girl like that. Your father's curate, when he needs one. Your father's successor, when he needs one of those. A pause, measured to the half-second. "And then there are kindnesses further afield. I hold paper belonging to a young man of good family who has been very foolish. His brother. I believe you've made his acquaintance. The county certainly believes it. Is presently arranging to beggar himself over it. It would give me real pleasure as a wedding gesture to burn that paper. Withdraw a certain wager too, while I'm at the fire. All that unpleasantness gone in one afternoon." He smiled. "You see, I've thought of everyone." And the terrible thing, the thing Nora sat with, hands folded while the mantel clock ticked, was that for 3 full seconds she did the sum. Freddie's vowels, burned. The wager, withdrawn. Theo unhooked from the slow public bleeding, free to sit by his mother without Pettibone's hand at his throat. Her father's roof, Patience's future. One signature. She had scolded Theodore Renshaw in an inn yard for exactly this arithmetic. 1 reputation spends better than 2, and here she was, running the same figures and finding they nearly balanced. Nearly. Except that the ledger had a page Pettibone couldn't see, and on it, in a hand she hadn't authorized, was written the memory of a man in a rainy gig, saying its lonely bookkeeping back to her like a countersign. "You'll have my answer Sunday," she said, rising, "as requested." "I'll have it now, surely. You've the look of a woman who's finished counting." "You mistake me, Sir John." She smiled at him from the door and made it warm, and watched, with the first pure satisfaction of the week, a flicker of uncertainty cross that untroubled face. "I've the look of a woman who's found the error in the books and is deciding whether to tell the auditor. Good day. Mind the step. The stone's cracked. We couldn't afford the mason." The note she sent by Patience after supper said only, "The church, 9 o'clock. Bring no lantern until you're inside. Q. St. Swithin's at night smelled of stone and snuffed candles, and 400 years of damp prayer. Nora let herself in by the vestry door with her father's keys, borrowed from the study hook while he dozed over Fordyce, and had 1 candle burning in the vestry, shielded from the windows, when the latch clicked, and Theo came in out of the dark, rain on his shoulders, church quiet on his feet. "Your sister's note said 9. Your sister also charged me 6pence for delivery." "She's building capital. We're a family of financiers." She held the candle up. "There." The parish chest sat under the vestment press where it had sat since before the Armada. Black oak, iron-strapped, big enough to hold a curled-up curate. Nora knelt and walked the candle along its face. 3 locks, as promised. Incumbents. She touched the first, ancient, the size of a child's fist. And churchwardens. Crake holds the second, Pettibone the third. Custom says all 3 open together, so no one man can be alone with the parish silver, the registers, or his own private snares. Theo crouched beside her, and the candlelight made the small vestry smaller. "Can your father's key?" 1 lock of 3. Even with Papa's, we'd need Crake, whom I refused in August, in terms he has probably embroidered since, and we'd still be 1 key short, unless you're proposing we petition Sir John for his. Her fingers moved along the strapping and stopped. Theo. It was the first time she'd used his name. Neither of them remarked on it. Both of them heard it. Below the 3rd lock, screwed through the ancient oak with bright new brass, sat a 4th. A squat, modern, London-made padlock, its hasp bolted straight through the lid. "He's added his own," Theo said quietly. "The 3-key custom protects the box from any one man. This does the opposite. Nothing comes out of that chest now unless Pettibone's watch chain key is present, whatever the vicar and Crake agree. He's converted your parish chest into his private strong room and made the church itself stand guard on it." He sat back on his heels. "It's almost admirable, like the loan papers. A snare you can't see till it's shut. Then we cut it. A file, a chisel, and he opens the box on quarter day, finds it forced, and knows. He'd move everything within the week, and we'd have shown our whole hand for nothing." He rubbed his eyes. The exhaustion was back, banked, but burning. "There has to be." "He offered to burn Freddie's vowels." She hadn't planned to say it. It came out of her sideways, the way the truth does at night in churches, and Theo went very still beside the candle. "Say that again." "This afternoon, in my father's parlour." His full and final terms. The vowels burned, the wager withdrawn, the roof mended, patience provided for. She kept her eyes on the padlock. "All of it. Gone in one afternoon. For my hand. He's thought of everyone. He said so." The silence had weight. When she finally looked up, Theo was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him. The banked exhaustion blown to open flame. "You will not." "I beg your pardon?" "You will not," he said, low and shaking. "Sit in a parlour and sell yourself to that man to settle my brother's account. Do you understand me? I would rather stand in the middle of the club and read the forged entry aloud myself." "Oh, would you?" She was on her feet without deciding to be. "The martyr objects to competition. You've been bleeding quietly for a month, buying your mother a peaceful death with your own name, and that's arithmetic. But the moment I run the same figures, it's a scandal? Explain the difference to me, Mr. Renshaw. Show you're working." "The difference?" He stopped. He was standing too. She hadn't seen him rise. One candle's worth of light, and the whole dark church listening, and his voice, when it came again, had dropped to something that was worse than shouting. "The difference is that my name is paper, and you are—" He didn't finish it. The unfinished sentence stood in the vestry between them, doing more work than any finished one had done all week, and Nora, who audited everything, could not for the life of her get to the bottom of the account of why her heart was behaving in this deranged fashion, and elected, firmly, professionally, not to look into it. It was the wager. It was the strain. It was 9 o'clock in a cold church, and candlelight was known to be untrustworthy. She would enter it under sundries and move on. "We're partners," she said, steadier than she felt. "Nobody's martyr. Your rule. Your rule. Somebody's rule." Her voice cracked infinitesimally on the word. "Kindly obey it." And that was when they heard the key in the south door. The candle was out between one heartbeat and the next, his hand, her breath. She never afterward knew which. In the blackness, Theo's grip found her wrist and drew her down behind the vestment press as the great door swung, and lantern light came walking up the nave, unhurried, and 2 sets of footsteps rang on the stone. "No, the whole of it." Pettibone's voice, conversational, obscene in the dark church. "Every paper, every counterfoil, the green book especially. Sunday the vicar gives me his answer, and one way or the other, I'll want this box holding nothing but hymnals by Monday. Weddings make people sentimental, Larch. Sentimental people, rummage." A second voice, dry as a signature. "And if her answer is no?" The lantern light stopped, a few feet and 1 oak press away from where Nora crouched with Theo's hand still around her wrist and his heartbeat, fast and furious, somewhere near her ear. "Then Monday," said Sir John Pettibone pleasantly, "I shall begin calling in the whole county at once, starting with the sunny one. Chapter 6. The lantern light came closer and stopped. Through the gap beneath the vestment press, Nora could see it laid out on the flagstones. A fan of yellow light, the toes of 2 boots polished past all reason, and the iron-bound corner of the chest itself. Pettibone's voice, when it resumed, was so near that she felt Theo's hand tighten on her wrist. Not restraint. Something closer to a man holding on. "The roof, Larch, that's the beauty of it. The chancel roof is failing. The vicar's been begging about it for 2 years. There are minutes to prove it. So, Monday, As the parish's new patron, I begin repairs. Generous. Immediate. And naturally, the contents of the vestry can't sit under open sky while the slates are off. So the whole chest, locked and sealed, witnesses welcome, travels to Stourfield for safekeeping. I don't open so much as a hymnal in public. I simply relocate. A soft rap of knuckles on old oak, proprietary, like a man patting a horse he's just bought. Charity, Larch. There's no instrument like it. And the settlement? Larch's voice was the sound of dust. If Sunday's answer is favourable. Draw it wide. Her portion's nothing. What I'm buying is quiet. The father signs anything with a Bible verse at the top. A pause, and then, lighter, almost amused. Oh, and keep the Renshaw paper apart from the rest when it's moved. On top. However Sunday falls, I'll want it in my hand within the fortnight. If she accepts, I burn it at the wedding breakfast and drink the toast to my own magnanimity. If she refuses, the lantern light swayed as he turned. Then the sunny one defaults, the brother beggars himself covering it, and I'll enjoy that nearly as much. It's a rare paper that pays out on both sides of a coin. The light swung. It travelled the vestry wall, crossed the press. Nora felt it pass over her like a hand, and for one endless second it hung on the flagstones not a foot from the hem of her cloak, which had escaped her knee and lay in the open like a confession. Mice, said Larch without interest. This far from the grain? Church mice, Larch, famously poor. They come for the sermons. Pettibone's own joke pleased him. The light swung away on his laugh. Come, I've kept the horses standing. Boots down the nave. The great door. The key. Silence. And the dark rushing back in like water. Neither of them moved for a slow count of 50. Then Theo let go of her wrist, finger by finger, as if his hand had to be talked into it. And Nora put back her escaped cloak hem with the deliberate calm of a woman declining to examine why her whole arm was ringing like a struck bell. Church mice, she whispered. I'll put it on his headstone. They went out by the vestry door, into a churchyard scoured with wet wind, and stood in the black lee of the tower to divide up a catastrophe. Monday, Theo said. He doesn't need to open it. He just carts the whole box to his own house with the county applauding his generosity. Once it's under his roof. Then we open it before Monday. Saturday night. Nora. Her name in his mouth, in the dark. She entered it under sundries with the rest of the swelling account. That padlock is a Brahma. The maker keeps one in his shop window in Piccadilly with a standing prize of 200 guineas for any man who can pick it. No one has. We are not going to manage it on a Saturday night in Hampshire with a hairpin. I don't want to pick it. The other three, then. We have your father's key, but Crake's and Pettibone's own warden key. I don't want to pick anything. Theo. She took his sleeve and turned him, cedar and rain, far too near, sundries, toward the black bulk of the church. This afternoon I knelt in front of that chest with a candle, and I looked at it the way I look at Pettibone's arithmetic. 4 locks, yes, all 4 on the front. It's 400 years old. It was built to stop Vikings and drunk sextons, not auditors. The lid hangs on 2 iron pintle hinges. At the back. The pins sit proud. You can see the tops of them, worn bright, because some sexton before the flood used to knock them out to oil them. She heard her own voice go bright and strange again, the way it had at Broadmead, the sound of a sum coming out even. He bought the finest lock in England, and he screwed it to the front of a box whose hinges lift out from behind. Drift the pins, tip the lid back on its own locks, and the whole thing opens backwards. Every lock still locked. not a scratch on his precious Brahma. We take the green book, we copy what we can't take, we set the pins back with a smear of old grease, and on Monday, Sir John Pettibone personally supervises the removal of an empty snare to Stourfield Hall with the county applauding. The wind worked at the yews. Theo was silent for so long that she began to recheck the figures, and then he laughed. Once, low, half disbelieving, the first entirely unguarded sound she had ever heard from him, and it did more damage to the sundries column than the whole rest of the evening combined. "You looked at an unpickable lock," he said, "and audited the box. Locks are what people show you. Boxes are what they actually have. It's the first rule of subscriptions." She stepped back. One full step, deliberate, because the lee of the tower had grown unaccountably warm for October. Saturday, 11 o'clock. Papa sleeps by 10. I need you for the pins. I've the wrists of a bookkeeper. And to stand between me and the consequences if I'm wrong. Bring a drift punch, a mallet, cloth to muffle it, and grease. Can you get them without questions? I own a stable. I can get them without words. The laughter was still in him somewhere, banked now. What do we do about witnesses on the road? If either of us is seen near this church at midnight? Then the wagers won and lost in the same sentence. Yes, I'm aware. The county already has us half-courting on the strength of one gig. She said it briskly, and then wished she hadn't said it at all, because the word courting stood there in the churchyard between them, exactly as the unfinished sentence had stood in the vestry, gathering meaning, refusing to disperse. Theo looked at her. Rain had started again, fine as sifted flour, silvering the wet dark between them. Nora. Saturday, she said. 11. Number your tools and count them again after. We leave nothing behind us but grease and hymnals. Good night, Mr. Renshaw. She was 10 steps down the churchyard path before he answered, and when it came it was quiet enough that she could honourably have pretended not to hear it, and didn't quite manage to. It was never the wager I was afraid of losing. Nora walked home through the rain, at a pace her mother would have called unladylike, conducting the following audit: that her pulse was elevated, attributable to exertion; that she had memorized the exact pitch of his laugh, attributable to nothing, struck from the record; that Sunday she must stand in her father's parlour and refuse a baronet with her family's whole weather in his hands, attributable, and that somewhere between a betting book and a box of hinges she had stopped being able to balance her own accounts, which had never once happened in 11 years of keeping them. Sundries, she wrote firmly, across the whole page of herself. It did not hold. It was already not holding. She slept badly, and woke to Patience shaking her shoulder in the grey of Friday morning, holding out a note with no seal, and wearing the face of a girl who has read it. Of course she had read it, and found it beyond even her powers of teasing. The Amberhurst groom brought it. He's still in the kitchen. Nora. He says Mr. Renshaw's away down the Andover Road an hour since, riding like the assizes were after him. The note was not from Theo. The hand was looser, younger, golden even in ink, and it slanted downhill across the page the way its writer went through the world, sweetly, carelessly, ruinously sure of forgiveness. Dear Miss Quill, you'll know by now what I did to my brother, so you'll know why it has to be me who mends it. Tell Theo not to follow and not to be angry. By Sunday there will be no debt, no wager, and no more paying for me. I've thought of a way to fix everything at once. Your servant, F.R. Chapter 7. Nora read Freddie's note 4 times, the way she read a suspect column. not for what it said, but for what it had been added up to conceal. And then she looked at the Amberhurst groom, who was standing in the parsonage kitchen, steaming gently and inhaling Patience's bread, as though loyalty burned calories. When Mr. Renshaw left, which way at the crossroads? Andover Road, miss. Told me to bring you that and say he'd send word. Andover. Nora laid the note flat on the table and put her finger under the words as if hearing a child's sums. No debt, no wager. No more paying for me. No more debt, mark you. No wager. There's only one way in the world to kill that wager outright. And it isn't money, and it isn't Andover. The wager dies if the entry was never honest. It dies if the book itself says so. She was already reaching for pen and paper. The club keeps its rooms at the White Hart in Winchester. Freddie's gone through Andover because the turnpike's faster, and he's gone to write a confession into the wager book in his own hand, in front of whichever members are drinking their breakfast, because he is 23, and no one has ever let him find out what things cost. She folded her message with 2 sharp creases and held it out. Winchester, not Andover. The White Hart. Ride. The groom looked at the note, at the bread, and at her. Begging pardon, miss, but master said to bring word to you, not orders back to— Your master, said Nora, is about to lose the only race he's run in a month by taking the wrong road. Winchester. If you kill a horse doing it, I'll buy you another out of the poor fund and square it with God personally. The groom left at a pace that suggested faith in her theology. Friday was 9 years long. Nora did the accounts. She did them twice. She visited the school, heard the 8 times table, mended the daybook, and lied to her father at dinner with a fluency that frightened her about why she was pale and why Mr. Renshaw's groom had called and why she kept looking down the lane. The Reverend Quill, for his part, was quiet in his own new way. Sunday sat at the table with them like an uninvited guest, and twice he began sentences that had Sir John in the middle of them and your own choice, my dear, entirely your own choice at the end, delivered in the voice of a man assuring himself the tide was optional. The word came at dusk, with mud to the rider's collar. Not the groom, a postboy, paid double, with a paper twisted rather than sealed. In a hand she had seen exactly twice, and would now have known anywhere. The cramped, careful T, nothing like its forgery. Too late. Reached the White Hart at 2. It was done by noon. F wrote his confession under the entry and signed it before a dozen members, then stood the room a toast to honesty. You perceive the whole tragedy of my brother in that sentence. The wager is void. The forgery is public. P was dining at the George not a mile away, and will have had it by 3 o'clock. You understand what follows. He has no reason now to wait for Sunday, and every reason to want that box under his own roof by morning. Whatever we meant to do Saturday is already too old. I have F. He is very sorry, and very proud of himself, and I cannot leave him. He talks of enlisting before the week's out, and he is drunk enough to do it. I will come the moment I can. Do not go near the church tonight. I am asking you. I have no right to ask you anything, and I am asking you. Wait for me. Jar. Nora read it twice. Then she carried it to the kitchen, where Patience was shelling the last beans by candlelight, and held it out. Patience read it. Being Patience, she read it twice too, and being 16 and no fool, she put her finger on the exact figure her sister had already circled. He says the chest goes to Stourfield by morning. He does. And he says don't go near the church tonight. He does. Patience set down the bean bowl. In the candlelight she looked, suddenly, much less like the family's sunshine, and much more like their mother, which Nora had never once noticed before and found she could not afford to notice now. "Then we'll want the flannel from the press," Patience said, "for muffling the mallet. You were never going to wait, and I'm not letting you go alone. And if you argue, we'll lose the moon." They went over the churchyard wall at the corner where the yew shadow ran all the way to the vestry door. Two cloaked figures with a market basket, inside which a mallet, a drift punch borrowed from the sexton's unlocked shed, a bottle of goose grease, 2 candles, and a paper of pins, clinked once. Patience packed them tighter with the flannel, and never clinked again. Her father's keys turned in the vestry lock. The church took them in with its stone breath, colder than outdoors, and the dark inside was total, older than the dark outside, the dark of 400 years of shut lids. They worked by one candle set on the floor behind the chest, where its light could not find the windows. Nora knelt at the back of the great box and laid her fingers on the first hinge pin, iron, worn bright at the crown exactly as she'd remembered, proud of the pintle by a thumbnail's width, and set the drift punch to it, and held out her hand for the mallet like a surgeon. Softly, she breathed, on the flannel, where church mice. The first blow made almost no sound at all. A fat, felted knock, like a heavy book closing 2 rooms away. The pin rose 1/8 of an inch. The second blow, 1/4. The candle flame leaned, righted. Somewhere above them, the tower clock gathered itself and struck 11, and under the cover of 11 strokes, Patience swung 11 times, and the first pin came up out of its keeper into Nora's palm, warm from friction, heavy as a stolen shilling. The second pin fought. It was the lower, damper, nearer the stone. It had rusted sweet to its socket, and the tower clock was done striking and would not help again until midnight. They greased it. They coaxed it. Patience's swings went smaller and smaller, and Nora crouched with both thumbs under the pin's crown, lifting as the punch drove, sweat cold on her spine in the cold church, until it gave all at once, with a squeal like a stepped-on mouse that stopped both their hearts for a 10 count. The knight said nothing back. "Now," Nora whispered, "it opens backwards." The lid was oak 2 inches through and iron-strapped. It took both of them, kneeling on the plinth, palms flat, walking it up and over on the fulcrum of its own 4 locks, the ancient 3 and Pettibones shining Brahma holding faithfully, uselessly on, hinging the lid open the wrong way like a jaw. Patience braced it against the wall. Nora took up the candle. The parish silver, wrapped in baize. The registers, calf-bound, smelling of 100 christenings, and laid across them, corded in red tape like a bale of ordinary business, bundle upon bundle of papers that had no business under God's roof, and on the very top, apart from the rest exactly as ordered, a single folded sheet docketed in Larch's dry hand, Renshaw, F., £312, with interest accruing. And beneath it, green morocco, soft with handling, its little brass clasp unlocked because what thief could ever reach it? The book. Nora opened it where it fell open, at the pages most used. Columns, names down the left, dates, sums lent, sums recorded as lent, 2 figures, side by side, differing. Repayments, and a last column of small notations in Pettibone's own hand. Enclosure labour, Lady Day. Daughter to service, Michaelmas. Withdrawn objection, vestry, March. A whole countryside, priced and filed. Tarrant was there, 4 lines of him, the dead curate. Names from Broadmead, from Marlow Green, from 3 parishes over, and Nora ran her eye down the ledger of her county's shame with the candle shaking very slightly in her hand, until it stopped shaking altogether, because it had stopped moving, because near the foot of the second page, in the column of names, entered 18 months ago in the sum of £40, chancel roof, by private hand, against the living's income, was written, in that dry, precise clerk's script, Quill, Reverend J., her father. Her father, who could not keep coal money from a sad story, had borrowed the roof from Sir John Pettibone before Pettibone ever bought the parish. And the patron's whole silken siege, the offer, the Sunday deadline, the warmest interest in the parish and its family, retotaled itself in one line of ink into something that had never been a courtship at all. It was a foreclosure. Nora, Patience breathed. I see it. Nora. And her sister's hand closed on her arm, and it was not the book Patience was looking at. It was the vestry doorway, where the dark had changed its shape, where a man stood, quite still, between them and the only unlocked door, with the night at his back and no lantern at all. Chapter 8. Theodore Renshaw had put his brother to bed drunk, penitent, and radiant with self-sacrifice, turned the key on him, and gone to sit with his mother, because it was 10 o'clock, and she would not sleep until he had. She was small in the big bed now, his mother. The illness spent her a little further every week, like a fortune being run through by someone she was too polite to accuse. But her eyes were awake tonight, and amused, and she held his hand in both of hers and said, Now, you'll tell me about the vicar's daughter. His heart performed a manoeuvre he kept off his face. Mother. Don't mother me. Mrs. Priddy dresses my hair, and Mrs. Priddy's sister keeps the White Hart's linen, so I dare say I know more of this county than you do, Theodore, laid up here like a spider at the centre of everything. Her thumb moved over his knuckles. They say she took the whole assembly's breath away, scolding you. They say you've been seen driving her about in the rain. They say she has a tongue like an auditor and refused Pettibone twice. A pause, wicked as a girl's. I like everything I have heard. It's not, the circumstances are not. He gave it up. She was dying. He did not lie to her. Those were the only two rules left, and they collided nightly. She is the cleverest and most impossible person I have ever met, and the circumstances are complicated. The circumstances are always complicated. Your father's were complicated. She patted his hand, pleased, and let her eyes close at last. Complicated is only arithmetic, my darling. You were always good at that. Go on. You've been listening for the road this half hour. He hadn't known it showed. He rode to the parsonage first, and found it dark. Dark in the wrong way. One candle moving behind the kitchen shutters like a bad conscience, and did not knock, because somewhere on the black road between Amberhurst and Nether Wallop, he had finally worked the sum that mattered. He had written wait for me to a woman who had rerouted his own groom, outread a betting book, outthought a Brahma lock, and never once in their acquaintance waited for anything but the right moment. Asking Honora Quill to wait was not a request. It was a category error. He turned the horse toward the church and admitted the rest of it to himself on the way, quietly, the way a man signs something he has read many times and can no longer pretend needs further study, that he was not riding through midnight frost for his brother's paper, or his mother's peace, or the family name. Those were the entries he showed the world. He was riding because Nora was in that church, and where she was had become, by some accounting he never saw performed, the only column in his life that could not bear a loss. It was never the wager, he'd told her. She had pretended not to hear. He had watched her pretend and loved her, and filed it. Her word, under sundries. The vestry door stood off the latch. He came into stone-cold darkness with his boots in his hand, like a housebreaker in his own family's church, and stopped. Candlelight, low and shielded, behind the great chest. The lid of the chest standing open backwards, tilted against the wall on the fulcrum of its own 4 locks, exactly as she'd promised. An impossible thing, a conjuring trick. And bent over it 2 hooded figures, one holding the light, one holding a green book. The one with the book turned. The candle found her face. Afterward, he could never rightly say which of them had crossed the vestry. He only knew that his hands had somehow arrived at her shoulders, and that his voice, when it came out, arrived as a furious whisper with the fury already dying in it, because she was whole. She was here. She was looking up at him with candle flame doubled in her eyes and gunpowder in her expression. "I asked you to wait. I received the request. I gave it every consideration." Her chin came up. "It was denied. Sit down, Mr. Renshaw, you're looming, and look at what my family's roof cost." She put the green book into his hands, open, her finger on a line, and Theo read, "Quill, Reverend J. £40, chancel roof, by private hand, against the living's income," and felt the last piece of Pettibone's architecture slide home. Not a courtship. Not even a siege. The man had bought the mortgage on this family's future 18 months before he bought the parish, and everything since, the wager, the advowson, the Sunday deadline, was simply a creditor arranging his collateral to taste. "He never once meant to be refused," Theo said slowly. "June was the only part that wasn't planned. Everything after June has been foreclosure." "With my father's own gratitude as the instrument?" "Yes." Her voice was steady in the way of things held steady by main force. "There are 11 more families in that book, Theo. Tarrant's whole servitude is 4 lines. It goes to the archdeacon and the magistrates at first light, before Sir John's had his chocolate. And then it no longer matters what he moves to Stourfield, because the county will finally be reading the right book." His eye had already gone. He despised himself for the reflex, even as it happened, to the top of the pile in the chest, to the docketed sheet in Larch's hand. "Renshaw, F. £312, £312 of Newmarket, and forged names and his mother's piece, folded small enough to fit inside a coat pocket." His fingers were an inch from it when hers closed around his wrist. "No. Nora, look at me. That paper is real. Freddie drank and signed and lost. The debt is true, and if it vanishes the night the chest is robbed, then we're not auditors, we're thieves. And everything in this green book becomes the pleading of thieves." Her grip gentled without loosening. Her eyes did not. "The book is his crime. The vowels are your brother's folly. We take the crime, and we pay the folly, publicly, honestly, down to the last shilling if it beggars, because that's the whole difference between us and him, and I will not spend that difference tonight, even for you, especially for you." And Theo Renshaw, who had spent a month learning that his name was paper, stood in a midnight vestry with his wrist in a bookkeeper's ink-stained grip, and understood that the admission he'd signed on the dark road had been, if anything, an undercount. "You're right." His voice came out rough. Put it back. You're right." "I know," said Nora, not unkindly, and put Freddie's ruin back on top of the pile, squaring its corners like any other document. "It's a character flaw. Patience keeps a list. Now help me close a 400-year-old jaw before—" The lid was the worst of it. Oak and iron walked back over on its locks, the hinge straps seated, and then the pins, driven home by candlelight with a flannel-wrapped mallet in Theo's fist and Nora's thumbs guiding the iron, and the second pin, the rusted one, screaming its small mouse scream once at the last half-inch, so that all three of them stood statue still in the guttering light, counting heartbeats against the silence. Which was when the silence answered. Not the church, the lane. Wheels, heavy ones, a cart, two carts, and hooves, several, unhurried, and through the vestry's little lancet window, as patience pinched the candle dead, light, swinging lanterns coming up from the road in a slow constellation. 4, 5, 6 of them, and a voice floating clear across the frost-bitten churchyard, conversational, unhurried, obscenely pleasant. The vestry door, Larch. We'll want it stood open for the carrying. Mind the graves, gentlemen. Some of you will have family. Pettibone. Tonight, after all. Hours early, carters and all, come for the whole chest before Sunday could complicate his arrangements. The vestry door, 15 feet away, and the lanterns already at the lich gate. The south door, locked, and Larch held a key to it. 2 women, 1 man, 1 green morocco book, and every way out of God's house about to fill with Pettibone's hired shoulders. Theo took Nora's hand in the blind dark, found Patience's shoulder with the other. Up, he breathed. The tower. Chapter 9. The tower stair was a stone corkscrew wide enough for 1 grown man or 2 frightened sisters, and they went up it in absolute blackness, a rope of hands. Theo leading because he'd rung here as a boy, Nora's fingers in his, Patience's fist knotted in the back of Nora's cloak, feeling each wedge-shaped step with their toes, while below them the vestry door boomed open, and lantern light and hired shoulders came flooding into the church they had failed to leave. The ringing chamber, when they gained it, was a small octagon of moving air and dangling shapes. 6 bell ropes hanging pale in the dark, like the ghosts of a gallows, their striped woolen grips just visible. And above, through the open trap, the vaster dark, where the bells themselves hung mouth down in their frames. The 3 of them folded down against the wall between the ropes, and through the floor, old boards, generous cracks, the light of 6 lanterns came up in blades and stripes, and every word below arrived as clearly as if the church had been built for exactly this, which, being built for sermons, it had. The plinth, gentlemen, and mind your feet. The floor's older than your families. Poles under, lift on my word. Grunts. The groan of iron-strapped oak leaving a plinth it had warmed for 4 centuries. Nora, her shoulder pressed to Theo's arm in the dark, her sister's cold hand wrapped in hers, listened to 11 families' evidence and her father's 40-pound noose being carried toward the door on poles, inside a box she had personally resealed, and felt, beneath the fear, distinct from the fear, the pure fury of an auditor watching the accounts walk off under armed escort. Then Larch's voice, dry and terrible, from low down, near the floor, near where the chest had stood. Sir John. A moment. The procession stopped. The hinges. Bring the light. There. The pin crowns are bright, and this grease is... A pause, in which Nora's heart concluded its business and shut up shop. This grease is fresh. Silence below. A long one. Then Pettibone's voice, and the horror of it was that it came out lighter, the voice of a man relieved of the tedium of pretending. Set it down. Break it open. Sir John, the locks are on the front, Larch, which appears to be the joke. Crowbar. Now. The sound of a parish chest being murdered came up through the floor in 3 heaves, and a splintering scream of old oak and lantern shadows swarmed over the ringing chamber ceiling like water, and Nora sat in the dark, doing the only arithmetic that mattered. It takes a man perhaps 40 seconds to search a chest for a green book that is currently pressing its corners into my ribs. It took Pettibone 30. Well, he said. Nothing else. That was the worst of it. No oath, no shout. The hired men below had gone dead quiet, the way men do when they realize their employer is a different animal than the one they hired on with. Larch. Attend. 4 locks untouched, the hinges drawn and reset. Nothing taken but 1 book. The registers left, the silver left. Rule out thieves. Thieves take silver. This was a reader. Footsteps, unhurried, crossing the stone. His voice moved with them, thinking aloud, and Nora realized she was listening to the man audit them. Who knew the box mattered? Who reads accounts for pleasure? Who holds the incumbent's key of a house where the incumbent sleeps by 10? The footsteps stopped. Who refused me twice, Larch, and quoted my own errors to me in her father's parlour on Thursday? Beside her, in the blackness, she felt Theo's whole body turn to iron. Miss Quill has made a very serious mistake, Pettibone went on pleasantly to the whole dark church. Because theft from a church is sacrilege, and sacrilege is a felony, and a felony charge against the daughter, sworn tomorrow before the magistrates with a broken chest in evidence, will settle every question in that family by Tuesday. And whoever assisted her, a man was seen on this road tonight, Larch, riding from Amberhurst, assisted a felony. One brother a forger, the other an accomplice. The mother won't see Advent, they say. Grief moves these things along. A soft sound. He had picked something up. Wood knocked hollowly on wood. So, my terms improve overnight, and I never even wanted the book back. I want it found, in the right hands, at the right hour. Providence, Larch. There's no instrument like it. And tonight, Sir John? Tonight the readers are still in the parish, possibly still. The footsteps turned. Nora could hear the smile arrive in his voice. In the building, the tower, Larch. Take a light. Patience's grip crushed her fingers. Below, one set of reluctant footsteps detached itself from the rest and started for the stair door, and Theo's mouth came to Nora's ear, less than a whisper, a shape of air. The trap. Up. Book in the bell. She didn't understand until she did. And then she was moving, cloak knotted up, hands and feet on ladder rungs polished by 200 years of ringers, up through the trap into the bell chamber itself. A freezing loft full of the smell of bird-lime and oiled iron, where 6 bells hung mouth down in their blackened frames, each big enough to bathe a child in, and beside the ladder head, squat in its own housing, the clock, whose ancient works chose that exact moment to give a whirring, gathering click deep in its iron gut, like a giant clearing its throat. Midnight. The clock was winding itself to strike midnight, and the strike hammer sat against the tenor bell 3 feet from her head. The little one, the treble, reach in. Theo's hands found her waist and steadied her as she leaned into the frame, into the freezing bronze mouth of the smallest bell, and wedged the green book high on the flat of the crown staple inside, canvas wrapped in Patience's sacrificed apron, jammed tight where no lantern shone and no hand would think to go, because who searches inside a bell? And below them, boots had reached the stone stair and were corkscrewing upward, and the clock went click again and click, gathering, gathering. Down. No. No time. Theo pulled her back from the frame and against the wall behind the great tenor's headstock, into the black angle where the frame met stone, Patience already folded small beside them, and his arms came around them both, one around her sister's shoulders and one around Nora entirely, her back to his chest, his hand rising to press her head into the hollow of his neck and against her ear. With the very last of the silence, he said, "Nora, if we come down from this tower into ruin, his ruin, our ruin, I no longer greatly care whose. There's an entry I want made first, in whatever book survives. I have loved you since the inn-yard, possibly since the salt. I am not asking you to—" The clock struck. The tenor bell was 3 feet away, and it went off like the end of the world. The first stroke, a physical blow, sound as weight, slamming through stone and bone and the boards underfoot, and Nora cried out and heard nothing of her own cry, and Theo's hand pressed her ear harder into his neck, and his other arm locked her sister close. And the second stroke fell, and the third. The whole loft one bronze roar, dust raining silver off the frames through the rungs of lantern light now rising through the trap. For Larch had reached the top. Larch was there, his light thrust up through the trapdoor into the bell chamber at the precise moment the fourth stroke broke over him like the wrath of God. And through the blur of her own shaken vision, Nora watched the lantern lurch and heard nothing, and the fifth stroke fell, and the sixth, and the light swung wildly once around the loft, over frames, over bells, over the black angle where 3 people stood pressed into one shadow behind half a ton of swinging hammered bronze. The 7th stroke, the 8th. The light stopped moving. Chapter 10. The 9th stroke fell, and in the shuddering gap after it, Nora opened her eyes and looked straight down the lantern's beam into the face of Mr. Larch. He stood half out of the trapdoor, dust sifting silver onto the shoulders of his black coat, his light steady now and pointed directly into the angle behind the tenor's frame, at Theo's arm around her, at Patience's white face, at the 3 of them pressed into one shadow that his lantern had just abolished. There was nowhere to be. They were seen. It was over, and the 10th stroke broke across all 4 of them, and through the roar, Nora watched the attorney's dry, precise face do something she would spend years trying to describe to people who had not been there. It calculated. She knew the look. God help her, she wore it daily. She watched Mr. Larch of Andover stand in a bell loft at midnight, deafened, employed by a man who had that very hour spoken of a dying woman as an instrument and a felony as a wedding gift, and she watched him total a column no one else could see. The 11th stroke. His eyes moved from her face to the rapt shape of nothing visible in the treble bell. He could not have seen it. She was certain he could not have seen it. And back. The 12th stroke fell and rolled away down its own echo, out over the sleeping parish. And in the ringing, bottomless silence afterward, Mr. Larch lowered his lantern and descended the ladder, and his voice floated up the stairwell as dry as a counter-signature. "Birdlime and bells, Sir John. Nothing has been up here in years." They stayed in the loft while the lanterns swung away down the nave, while poles and shoulders took the broken chest and its bundles out into the night, while wheels ground away down the lane towards Storefield. They stayed through a 1/4 and 1/2, deaf and dust-covered and cramped, until the church below them had been silent so long that the silence grew a floor they could trust. The book stayed where it was. That was Nora's ruling, made with her ears still howling. The safest strongroom in Hampshire was a consecrated bell that the whole county could hear was undisturbed. It would keep until it could be received, before witnesses, by hands no magistrate could question. Which meant that before Sunday's ringers touched a rope, she was going to have to wake her father and spend the truth. They came down the corkscrew stair on legs like a foal's and out through the vestry into the churchyard, and the cold, clean air went through Nora like absolution. Frost on the yews, stars in their courses. Patience walked 3 steps ahead, deliberately, unsubtly, 16 and magnificent, pretending profound interest in the lich-gate. "You never finished," Nora said. Theo stopped. In the starlight, dust silvering his hair and shoulders, half deaf. He looked down at her with the wariness of a man who had thrown his whole fortune on a table and heard the wheel still spinning. "I beg your pardon?" "In the loft. You had begun an entry. I am not asking you to, and then the clock preempted you, which I imagine you arranged, being a man who flinches from finishing his sentences. My name is Paper, and you are. That one's a month overdue as well." Her heart was going like Patience's mallet, felted and frantic. She kept her chin up. It was the only bookkeeping she had left. "I run an orderly ledger, Mr. Renshaw. I can't carry open entries. Finish them." "Nora." "Finish them, or I'll finish them for you, and you won't like my hand in your books. I'm told it's cramped." "You are the whole account." He said it quietly, and the quiet had the same weight the bells had had, a sound she felt in the bone. That's the end of both sentences. My name is Paper, and you are the whole account. I have loved you since you crossed an assembly room to ruin me, and stopped because my handwriting didn't match. I loved you in a gig in the rain, when you said lonely bookkeeping, and I understood that I had been waiting 31 years for one other person who kept the same books. I am not asking you to answer tonight, with your ears ringing and a felony charge being drafted against you. I'm not asking for anything. I have nothing left to offer you but a forger for a brother, a mortgaged name and— "Yes," said Nora. "A family in every kind of ruin and— "What?" "Yes. Enter it in ink." Her voice betrayed her on the last word, cracked right across, and she discovered she didn't care. The column had been not holding for days, and there was a strange, enormous relief in letting it fall. "You want my working shown. Very well. I have been filing you under sundries since the parsonage garden, Theo, because sundries is where an auditor hides the figures she can't face, and the column overran the page somewhere around the hinges. And tonight in that loft, when the light stopped on us and I thought it was ruin, do you know what I regretted? Not the book. Not even Papa. I regretted that the clock had interrupted you, and that I might go to my grave with the entry unanswered." She reached up and put her cold hand flat on his chest, over the racket his heart was making, an auditor verifying assets. "So, ledger's balanced. It's you. Under every heading I have, it's—" He kissed her. It was not a practiced kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding a door shut with his shoulder for a very long time, and had finally been told he could let go. Her face in both his hands, as though she were the one fragile thing in a breaking world, frost and dust and the ghost of cedar. And Nora, who audited everything, closed her eyes and let this one entry go gloriously, permanently unexamined. The stars wheeled. Somewhere her heart filed itself under a new heading and threw away the old book entirely. From the direction of the lich-gate came her sister's voice, conversational, carrying beautifully in the frost. "A shilling. My silence has become expensive, and I'm owed an apron." They broke apart, laughing, both of them, wrecked and half-deaf in a churchyard at 1 a.m, with the world coming down around 4 families. And that was when Nora saw that Patience was not looking at them. She was looking at the lich-gate itself, where a lantern burned, hooded low, where a black-coated figure stood waiting with the stillness of a man accustomed to outlasting other people's emotions. His cart horse tethered up the lane, his colleagues long departed, his dry face unreadable in the small light. "Forgive the hour," said Mr. Larch. "But you'll want to hear what I know before the sun comes up, Miss Quill. And I," he added, with the very faintest inclination of his head. "We'll want a good deal in writing." Chapter 11. At 2 o'clock on Sunday's dark side, the parsonage kitchen held the strangest vestry meeting in the history of the parish. An attorney with dust on his shoulders, a gentleman with dust in his hair, a girl of 16 presiding over the teapot with the gravity of a chancellor, and Nora at the head of the table with pen, ink, and 3 sheets of her father's sermon paper, taking down the deposition of Mr. Larch. He talked the way he did everything, dryly, precisely, in order, and what he laid on the kitchen table between the teacups was the whole machine. "You have the book. The book is the fraud, but the book requires reading. I am the reading." He turned his cup a quarter turn, aligning its handle. "I drafted the instruments, Miss Quill. Every loan you found in that ledger passed across my desk twice. Once as it was written, once as it was recorded. I can put dates, sums, and Sir John's instructions to 2/3 of the entries. I am also, as of 11 o'clock last night, an eyewitness to my employer taking a crowbar to a consecrated parish chest and carrying its contents to his private house by midnight cart. Before 6 hired men." A pause, arid as ever. "You perceive the shape of my situation. When that book surfaces, and it will surface, you are not a woman who steals things in order to keep them. Every man in its pages will be running for the nearest magistrate to tell his story first. I have merely arrived at the magistrate before the crowd." "You've arrived at a kitchen," said Theo. "I've arrived at the bookkeeper," said Larch, "which any man in this county could tell you is the same thing, only faster." He looked at Nora. "My terms. A memorandum, drawn tonight, dated tonight, witnessed by Mr. Renshaw and the Reverend, that I came forward voluntarily, unsolicited, and before any warrant, information, or charge existed. Beyond that, I want nothing. No fee. No indemnity you haven't the power to grant. The memorandum, and one piece of advice taken. Which is? Do not go to the quarter sessions." He said it flatly. "The chairman of the bench is Sir Miles Farrow. Turn to the 3rd page of your green book, Miss Quill, when you next have it in hand, and read the 4th name from the top. Sir John does not lend money. He lends leashes, and he has spent 6 years fitting them to every neck in this county that wears a chain of office. There is exactly 1 magistrate within a day's ride who has no page in that book. Mr. Verrill, at King's Somborne, who was offered a loan in the year 9 and replied in terms Sir John has never forgiven, and one authority Sir John's whole method never thought to leash, because it holds no money, and he could not imagine wanting anything it had." Nora set down her pen. "The church. The chest was church property. The registers he disturbed are church records. The living he bought, the roof he weaponized, the poor fund he skimmed. Every wheel of it turned inside the Archdeacon's jurisdiction, and Archdeacon Soane, whom I have twice watched reduce grown patrons to schoolboys over a mishandled font, is at Winchester, 9 miles away." Larch aligned his cup another quarter turn. "Sir John built his machine to be invisible to the law he could buy. He never insured it against the law that can't be." From the doorway, a voice said, "Soane." They all turned. The Reverend Josiah Quill stood on the kitchen stair in his dressing gown and nightcap, awakened by the light or providence, holding a candle and looking from his daughters to the dust, to the attorney, to the gentleman, to the deposition drying on his sermon paper. And Nora rose and went to her father and spent the truth. All of it. The wager and the forgery, the gig and Broadmead, the green book and the £40, the hinges, the bells, the felony that would be sworn against her by a man who had offered him friendship, It took a quarter of an hour. He sat down halfway through, slowly, on the kitchen stair, and his candle shook, and he did not once interrupt. When it was over, he was silent for a long time, an old man in a nightcap with his whole gentle world re-totaled in front of him. When he finally spoke, it was not to her. He priced my gratitude. The vicar's voice was very quiet, and there was something in it Nora had never heard in 61 years of sermons on forgiveness. He watched me thank God for him, Mr. Larch, and he entered it in a column. The roof of my church, my daughter's. He sat in my parlour, drinking my coffee and holding a lien on my thanks. He stood. He straightened his nightcap, which ought to have been ridiculous and somehow was not. And when he looked up, Nora finally saw the man who had once, according to her mother, walked into a cholera street when the sexton wouldn't. Anselm Soane shared my staircase at Oxford for 3 years and still owes me for a Greek lexicon. I shall write to him now, and Mr. Renshaw will ride at first light. And on Sunday. He looked around his kitchen, at all of them, and drew one long breath. On Sunday, Sir John Pettibone shall come to my church for his answer, and he shall have it, from the pulpit if necessary. It is, he added with terrible mildness, still my living, while I breathe. Papa, said Patience into the ringing silence, you are the most surprising man in Hampshire. Your mother always said so. He was already hunting the ink. Nora, the good paper. Mr. Larch, you'll take a bed here tonight. Defectors sleep badly on roads. Mr. Renshaw. And here the vicar paused, pen loaded, and looked at Theo over his spectacles with an expression that had married 300 couples and missed nothing, ever, in a front pew. You have dust in your hair, sir, at 2:30 in the morning, in my kitchen, standing beside my daughter in a manner I can only call wagered. Is there any other business before the chair? Theo, to his lasting credit, did not so much as glance sideways. Yes, sir. When this is over, and whether it ends in triumph or in the dock, I intend to ask for Nora's hand. I'd have your blessing to ask, though I'll ask regardless. I'm done paying quietly for things that matter. Blessing, said the Reverend Quill, writing. Granted, witnessed, dated. Soane will want the Greek lexicon mentioned. It's the only debt the man remembers. Patience to bed. Nora, the sand. Gentlemen, the county. Saturday went by like a held breath. Theo rode for Winchester at first light with the vicar's letter, and came back at dusk on a spent horse with an answer that was 1 line long. I will be in your church on Sunday, Josiah, and I am bringing my visitation robes. A.S. A second rider went quietly to King's Somborne, and Mr. Verrill of the Year 9 sent back no letter at all, only his compliments, and the single word, attending. Larch spent the day at the kitchen table converting the Green Book's arithmetic, from memory, into 11 sworn pages. Patience carried tea and eavesdropped in a supervisory capacity. Nora copied everything twice, because paper was the family trade after all, and tried not to count the hours, and failed, and counted them. Pettibone made no move. That was the worst of it, the stillness from Starfield, all Saturday, smooth as ice over deep water. No constable came, no settlement was sent. He was waiting for Sunday, exactly as promised, with the confidence of a man who had never once seen a Sunday he couldn't foreclose on. It was nearly 10 that night, the vicar asleep over his sermon, which was Micah chapter 2. Woe to them that devise iniquity. And Nora reading the same sworn page for the 5th time by the kitchen fire with Theo's coat around her shoulders and Theo's shoulder under her cheek, both of them too spent for speech and neither willing to be the first to move. when hooves came up the lane at a gallop and did not slow for the gate. The rider was the Amberhurst groom, hatless, and his face in the doorway emptied the warmth from the room before he said a word. "Sir, Mr. Renshaw, sir. You're wanted home. It's Mr. Frederick, sir. He's got out of his room and—" The groom's breath heaved. "And he's been this hour with your mother, talking." "He's told her, sir. He's told her everything." Chapter 12. Theo took the Amberhurst stairs 3 at a time and found his brother sitting on the floor outside their mother's door, knees up, golden head down, like a boy of 8 awaiting sentence. "Theo?" Freddie's face, lifting, was scoured raw. "Don't. Whatever you're going to say, I know. I got out through the dressing room, and I went in there to say goodbye before I enlisted, and she looked at me the way she does, and it all just came out of me. Newmarket, the paper, your name in the book, what you've been carrying." His voice cracked clean through. She listened to the whole of it. She never once looked away. And then she rang for Priddy and told me to send you in the moment you came. And Theo... She wasn't crying. Why wasn't she crying? His mother was sitting up against her pillows with her shawl squared on her shoulders and her hands folded, and her eyes, when they found him, were bright, dry, and entirely awake. "There you are," she said. "Come here and sit down, Theodore, and do not begin apologizing, because I have had one son weep on my counterpane tonight, and the laundry cannot support 2. Mother, you bought me a peaceful death." She said it conversationally, taking his hand between her 2 small dry ones, and it went through him like the tenor bell. "With your own name, in installments, for a month. You sat by this bed every evening, ruined a little further every day, and smiled at me. My darling, I am going to say this once, while I have breath to say things once. I never authorized the purchase." Her grip tightened, fierce out of all proportion to the frail hands making it. "I have buried your father and outlived 2 of my babies, and I am about to embark on the one journey your arithmetic cannot smooth. And you both thought, that what I needed carried up those stairs each night was ignorance, as though I were the sunny one, as though peace were made of not knowing." She shook her head slowly. "Peace is made of knowing who your children are, Theodore. Tonight I finally do. One of them is foolish and honest, and told me the truth with his whole heart breaking. And one of them loved me so much, he nearly let a wicked man eat him alive in silence. I could shake the pair of you." Theo bowed his head over their joined hands, and for a while the room held only the fire settling and the clock, and his mother's thumb moving over his knuckles, the same stroke she'd used when he was 6, and the world was his father's illness. "Now," she said at last, briskly, "Priddy is under orders. The bath chair, the fur-lined cloak, and the good bonnet. You will carry me into St. Swithin's tomorrow, in front of the whole county, and I shall sit in the family pew between my 2 sons while it happens, whatever it is." Frederick's account grew confused around a bell tower, because Sir John Pettibone has spent a month wagering on this family, and tomorrow the family attends the settlement, in full. Her eyes glinted, wicked as a girl's. "Besides, if I am to have the vicar's daughter, and I am having her, Theodore, don't bother with the face. I intend to watch her win." Sunday came up white and still, hoar-frost on every yew, and by 9:30 the whole parish knew that something was in the wind, because the whole parish had seen the Archdeacon of Winchester's carriage at the parsonage gate, and visitation robes, as Larch observed, travel faster than fire. Nora stood in the vestry, the chest's splinters swept into a corner like a crime scene tidied by a housemaid, which it was, and watched the strangest procession of her life go up the tower stair. Archdeacon Soane, robed and grim and enjoying himself immensely. Mr. Verrill of King's Somborne, square as a door. Her father, Mr. Larch with his 11 sworn pages, and puffing behind with the parish lantern, Churchwarden Crake, who had been fetched at 8, told the whole of it at past, and had gone from wounded suitor to instrument of justice in the time it took to say Pettibone's private padlock, because there is no ally on earth like a vain man who discovers he too was being made a fool of. It was Crake, on the Archdeacon's instruction, who climbed to the bell chamber. Crake's arm that reached into the frozen mouth of the treble. Crake who came down the ladder scarlet with cold and consequence, bearing an apron-wrapped bundle which he presented to the Archdeacon of Winchester before 4 witnesses of unimpeachable character, found, as the record would state, within the fabric of the church, where it had at all times remained. Soane unwrapped it, turned 3 pages, and read for 2 minutes in absolute silence. "Madam," he said at last to Nora, "I have sat on consistory courts for 11 years. I have seen simony, embezzlement, and a churchwarden who sold the lead off his own roof. I have never seen a parish audited from inside a bell." He closed the green book and tucked it into his robes like judgment itself going to roost. "Your father tells me you kept these accounts at 14. When this business is over, I may have a proposal of employment that will scandalize the diocese. Now, I believe I hear the quality arriving. Let us all go and be ordinary." The church filled the way it hadn't filled since the peace celebrations. Tarrant and his neighbours in the free pews, 2 of Saturday midnight's carters gone very thoughtful in the back, the Renshaw pew glorious with a bath chair, a fur-lined cloak, and a small, indomitable woman, flanked by both her sons, whose entrance had drawn a sound from the congregation like wind through wheat. And at 10 o'clock precisely, Sir John Pettibone came up the aisle. He came dressed for a betrothal, dove grey, immaculate, a small smile prepared for the vicar's capitulation. And Nora, watching from the parsonage pew, saw the exact sequence of his undoing arrive in his face like entries posted one by one. The Archdeacon's robes at the communion rail. Query. Verrill, unmovable in a borrowed pew. Query. Urgent. Larch, seated with the Quill family, meeting his eye with the placid finality of a signature already dried. Entry in error. And last, the empty, splintered corner of the vestry doorway, where 400 years of oak no longer stood, and the treble bell's rope hanging innocent among its sisters, account overdrawn. He sat. There was nothing else for him to do. The service had begun, and a man cannot foreclose on matins. The Reverend Josiah Quill preached on Micah, the 2nd chapter, in a voice no one in Netherwallop had ever heard him use. "Woe to them that devise iniquity upon their beds. They covet fields, and take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage." And he never once looked at the patron's pew, and everyone in the church looked at nothing else. And when the sermon ended, the vicar did not come down. "Before we conclude," he said, 3 matters touching this parish. First, in the night between Friday and Saturday, the parish chest of this church, 400 years in that vestry, was broken open with iron and carried to a private house. The Archdeacon is here upon that business, which is now the church's and the magistrates', whose informations were sworn this morning at 8. Second, and here his voice, gentle Josiah Quill's voice, came down the nave like the tenor bell. A book was recovered this morning from within the fabric of this church, before witnesses, and is in the Archdeacon's hand. It contains the accounts of a moneylender. 11 families of this county are written in it twice, once as the loan was made, and once as it was recorded, and among the names is my own. I borrowed £40 for the roof over your heads, and I thanked God for the lender, and my gratitude was entered in a column as security. I tell you this from my own pulpit, because the man who kept that book has spent 6 years teaching this county to be ashamed in his favour, and shame is a debt I am hereby cancelling for every soul in this parish. You were not fools. You were farmed. He let the silence stand a moment, and it stood trembling. Any person holding paper of Sir John Pettibone may bring it to Mr. Verrill, or to me, this week, without fear. Third, the vicar took off his spectacles and folded them, and looked down at last, mildly, terribly, at the dove-grey figure in the patron's pew. Sir John did me the honour this week of requesting my answer to a proposal of marriage concerning my elder daughter, and asked that it be given today. Sir John, here is my answer, from my own pulpit, in front of my own parish, while I breathe. The lady declines. Her family declines. This church declines. And the God of Micah, sir, whose chest you broke and whose poor you priced, I am given to understand he was never once fooled at all. What Pettibone did then was, in its way, the most instructive thing Nora ever learned from him. He rose, bowed slightly to the pulpit, as though closing a meeting that had gone against the chair, and walked down the aisle and out of the church with his back straight and his hat in his hand, past Tarrant, who stood, past the Carters, who did not look away, past Mrs. Renshaw, who watched him go with her chin high and did not deign even to smile. A man leaving the county in every sense, socially dead between the door and the lich gate, with Verrill's sureties waiting for him at his own gate, and the assizes beyond that. He never once ran. Nora, who hated him as much as she had ever hated anything, entered it fairly in the record. The man could lose. It was the only honest transaction she ever saw him make. The doors had barely settled when Freddie Renshaw stood up in the family pew, scarlet to the ears, and said loudly to the entire congregation, "I forged the entry in the wager book. It was my debt and my cowardice, and my brother paid for it, and I'm paying it back. Every shilling of the £312, if it takes me 10 years, and Mr. Verrill has offered me a place under his steward to begin, and that's all. That's all I wanted to say. Mama, you can stop pinching me." "I am not pinching you," said Mrs. Renshaw serenely. "I am steering you. Sit down, my love. You did that beautifully." And then, because her father was still in the pulpit, and because he had, as Patience later testified, the light of Oxford mischief in his eye, and because Theo had turned in the Renshaw pew and looked across the church at Nora, with the whole of the account standing open in his face, the Reverend Josiah Quill cleared his throat one final time. "There remains," he said, "one further notice. I publish the banns of marriage between Theodore James Renshaw, of this parish, and Honora Quill, spinster, of this parish. This is the first time of asking. If any of you know cause or just impediment—" He paused, surveyed his electrified congregation, his weeping and laughing younger daughter, the bath chair from which Mrs. Renshaw had emitted a most unladylike sound of triumph, and his elder daughter's scarlet, shining, utterly unaudited face. "You are to declare it. Though I warn you," he added, over the rising storm of the parish's joy, "the lady has seen the books. She always sees the books, and she assures me that this one, at long last, balances." Epilogue. They were married on the 21st of December, the shortest day of the year, which Nora considered efficient, the least possible daylight expended on ceremony, the longest possible night to follow. And St. Swithin's was fuller than it had been even for the fall of Sir John Pettibone, because the county had discovered that it loved a wedding almost as much as a reckoning, and this one was both. Much had been entered in the 10 weeks between. The Green Book had done its work at the quarter sessions, a reconstituted bench, Sir Miles Farrow having discovered urgent business in Bath from which he was not expected to return. And Pettibone's paper empire had come apart the way such things do. Not in one crash, but in a long, satisfying unravelling, loan by loan, as Mr. Verrill and a borrowed chancery clerk recomputed 6 years of double arithmetic and the sequestered rents of Stourfield paid the differences back. Tarrant had wept in the parsonage kitchen, which Nora had expected. What she had not expected was Susan Tarrant, home from service with her withheld wages restored, marching up the parsonage path the following Monday to ask whether Miss Quill required an assistant with a good hand and a better memory, terms negotiable. Nora had hired her before the kettle boiled, because there was work. Archdeacon Soane's scandalous proposal had arrived formally in November on diocesan paper. The charity accounts of the Archdeaconry's rural parishes to be reviewed, quietly, thoroughly, at a fee, by a person of proven discretion whom the letter throughout referred to as the auditor, gender ungrammared, which Nora suspected had cost the Archdeacon's secretary a sleepless night, and the Archdeacon nothing at all. Sir John, awaiting the Lent assizes from a set of rooms in London that were reported to be very quiet, was said to have laughed for a full minute when he heard, and then stopped. Nora believed both halves of the report. Larch had untangled it all, dry as ever, and had somehow emerged as the most trusted attorney in 3 parishes, there being, as he observed, no advertisement like a man who knows exactly where the bodies were kept, having filed them. Craik had commissioned a new parish chest from the Winchester ironmongers to his own triumphant specification, and showed its innovation to anyone who slowed down near the vestry. The hinges were on the inside. Freddie had gone to Verrill's steward the Monday after the reckoning, and had appeared at Amberhurst every Sunday since, with dirt under his nails, and the first instalment of £312, counted out in coin on his brother's desk, with a pride so naked it made Theo's throat ache. He stood up at the wedding as groomsman, golden and scrubbed, and cried harder than either bride or groom, which surprised no one. Patience, bridesmaid, had presented her sister on the wedding morning with a small marbled account book in which every fee, toll, and silence tax of the entire campaign was entered in a neat schoolgirl hand. Carriage of note to Amberhurst, 6d. Non-description of churchyard kiss, 1 shilling. Apron, sacrificed, 2 shillings and 6d. Sundries, and total forgiveness of the debt, marked paid in full by wedding. Nora kept it afterward in the drawer with the marriage lines. It seemed to belong there. And the bells, all 6, the whole tower swinging, rang them out of the church into the white noon, and the ringers swore ever after that the treble rang sweetest of the peal, and would tap her sound bowl for luck before ringing for as long as any of that band pulled a rope, because she was the bell that had kept the book, and everyone in that county knew a faithful guardian when they heard one. It was afterward, at the wedding breakfast at Amberhurst, Mrs. Renshaw enthroned by the fire in the good bonnet, thinner than October, but bright as frost, presiding over the room she had refused to leave until, as she informed her physician, the accounts were closed, that the last entry surfaced. Theo had been telling the Archdeacon the beginning of it, the torn page arriving at the parsonage with no signature, the whole avalanche's first pebble. "We never did discover who sent it. Larch swears it wasn't him. He says if it had been him, it would have arrived with a covering memorandum and an invoice." "It would have," said Larch from the sideboard. "And Pettibone's people never knew the page was missing. Someone tore entry 214 out of a locked club's book, addressed it to the one woman in Hampshire guaranteed to go to war over it, and never claimed the credit. It's the one column that never balanced. There was a small silence, and into it, from the fireside, came a sound Nora had learned to be wary of in 10 short weeks of daughterhood. Mrs. Renshaw, gently clearing her throat. "Mrs. Priddy's sister," she said, to no one in particular, examining her rings, "keeps the linen at the White Hart, where the club has its rooms, and where the WAGER book sits in a cupboard that is locked. Theodore? In precisely the way that nothing is ever locked to the woman who keeps the linen." She looked up then, and her eyes went from her son to his wife, and they were dancing. "I heard of that entry the night it was made. I heard my son had signed his name to a forgery to bury his brother's folly, and that he intended to bleed for it in silence until I was safely dead and couldn't be embarrassed. And I was laid up here, like a spider at the centre of everything, with no weapon left in this world but the servant's post and one piece of information: that there was a young woman at Netherwallop Parsonage who had refused Pettibone to his face, kept her father's books from the age of 14, and had, by every account, a tongue like an auditor and the courage of a house-fire. She folded her hands, wholly unrepentant, a general reviewing a satisfactory campaign. So I sent her the page, and then, my darlings, I did the only other thing a dying woman can do. I waited to see whether I was right. The room had gone entirely still. Nora looked at the small, indomitable woman by the fire, the first pebble, the whole time, the matchmaker, the strategist, the client, and began, helplessly, to laugh. "You wagered," she said. "You, madam, of all this county. You made a wager on me sight unseen." "I made an investment, Honora. Kindly learn the difference now you're family." Mrs. Renshaw held out both hands, and Nora crossed the room and took them, and the dry, small fingers gripped hers with everything they had. "And I'll tell you what I told my son 30 years of Octobers ago. Complicated is only arithmetic. I looked at the whole tangled sum of it. The wager, the forgery, the debt, my two dear fools. And I found the one figure that would resolve every column at a stroke." Her voice dropped, for Nora alone, rough suddenly at its edges. "It was never the book I sent you, child. It was the family." The register lay open in the vestry, on the table where the old chest used to stand, and the Reverend Josiah Quill entered the marriage in his careful hand, while the witnesses crowded the little room with candle warmth and frost breath. "Theodore James Renshaw of this parish, to Honora Quill of this parish, 21st December, by banns," and passed the pen to his daughter. Nora signed. Her husband signed beneath, the cramped, careful T that had begun everything, and she looked at their two names standing together in the column, witnessed, dated, entered in ink in a book that had never once in 400 years recorded a lie, and thought of entry 214, torn out and burned long since, and of green morocco locked in a diocesan strongroom, and of all the books men keep to hide what they are, and of this one, the right book, the one that only ever says, "These two people stood up before God and their county, and meant it." "Well, Mrs. Renshaw," said Theo, low, just for her. "Does it balance?" Nora set down the pen and took her husband's arm, and the bells broke loose above them, the treble singing loudest, ringing their names out over every frosted field in the parish. "To the farthing," she said. The end. Thank you for spending your time with Romance Haven. If this story captured your heart, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting us know your favourite character or moment. Your support helps us bring more unforgettable Regency romances to life. Your escape into romance awaits. Until our next story, happy listening. Your escape into romance awaits.